try to touch upon beyond the biology and the habitats and the stuff that's on here. I'll try to correlate it to fishing strategies and some things that you'll see on the local lakes. The reason I put bluegill and pumpkin seed up front because they're everywhere. And the other reason I want to put it up front is most of the time people look at bluegill and pumpkin seeds as one and the same. They're sunfish. Well, they're actually quite different, and that's why I wanted to touch upon it a little bit because it really affects things. I'll start with the bluegill. Bluegills are more communal fish. They're not nearly as aggressive as pumpkin seeds. They spawn in big groups, and you'll see there's a picture on there. It looks like a honeycomb. That's something you look for in the water. It also is very evident if any of you guys are really good with graphs, you'll clearly see that right on the bottom. For example, Honeoye Lake is at Log Cabin Point. Just to the north of Log Cabin Point is probably the prime bluegill spawning area. If you get out in that flat when there's not many weeds, the whole thing is just bluegill beds. Get out there with your electronics if you want to see what they look like. Also, bluegill spawn once per season. They'll come in early, they'll spawn shallow, then they leave. Then they go out deep. They don't really come shallow. They will come in and feed kind of at night and low light periods. But pretty much they're open water as opposed to pumpkin seeds. They're the opposite. Bluegill want open areas to spawn, a little harder substrate, sandy, gravelly is great. Pumpkin seeds want silty bottoms, dense vegetation. They'll pick pockets. And while they're very aggressive, so they don't like to get in big nest areas. They'll spawn in similar areas, but it won't be nest after nest. They'll spread out and get territorial. You can cruise across and you'll see the large pumpkin seeds hovering up above the beds. So just something to think about. Fishing wise, just some ideas. Bluegills, as I said, they go shallow all at once, but the mature bluegills are usually larger. They'll be the main spawners. But what you have is called sneaks. Sneaks are the young juvenile male bluegills that aren't big enough to have a nest and attract females. What they do is hide around the perimeter and they dart in and out trying to fertilize the eggs in the beds, sneaking in. That's why they're called sneaks. But because of that, they create behaviors that you're going to want to mimic if you're fishing around a bluegill bed. Darting, real darting motions, quick in and out right across the bluegill beds. And the bass target those juvenile bluegills that are hanging around the beds, not the big adults. So if you kind of can mimic that, that's a good pattern around bluegill beds. Pumpkin seeds, as I said, they're more solo, kind of hang in groups. After they do spawn, they'll spawn. I can't remember the number, but I think it's about up to 6 times a year throughout the season. So it's a reoccurring thing. So it's a pattern that kind of once if you figure something out, it's going to stay throughout the summer. A little more reliable that way. Neither one are probably the preferred forage just because they have so many spines. They're not the easiest to digest for a bass. So I had crappie next. Crappie are that prevalent on the majority of our lakes, so I don't really want to spend too much time on them. One thing I will point out is Honeoye Lake right now is in the process of a boom of crappie. There's tons of 9 to 11 inch crappie out there, so if you like to target them, this is probably the next couple of years is probably the time to do it. But they do, a lot of people think they spawn right after ice out, but typically they don't. They do come shallow right after ice out and feed. Most of the time they're spawning right before bass do. They use similar habitat. They love tree stumps. They'll hang out in the thin, sparse weeds. You'll see them suspended all throughout the weed beds, right pre and post spawn. Something you can target. But for the most part, our lakes aren't really dominated by crappie. If you get up to Black Lake, that's a little bit different story. But Honeoye is probably the one that, there are certain populations in Canisius, there's good populations in Sodus, Oneida, but they really don't play a major role in bass forage. Perch is probably one that I think people should pay attention to. Perch aren't nesters, but they do spawn earlier in the season than most of the other panfish. They do just come in and they basically have sticky coils and strings of eggs. They'll just come in and basically lay them around the surface, over logs, over vegetation. They don't guard them. They nest, fertilize, and leave. it takes a couple of weeks, I think, roughly for them to hatch. But the key thing I wanted to point out is the young stay shallow for, I have to look at this again, but 30 to 40 day period. Then they school. Once they kind of leave the weeds and leave the shells, they go offshore to school, and that's critical, especially for Oneida Lake, the embayments on Lake Ontario. You really want to learn that pattern, and it's not nearly what it used to be on Oneida. Oneida bass used to really target perch exclusively for many times of the year, but with the introduction of gobies, there's good populations of shad, there's blueback herring in Oneida. They're not stuck on one forage, and that's one of the things I was going to say. I targeted this talk towards northern lakes. As you get towards southern impoundments, they don't have the diversity that we have in terms of habitat and forage fish. So fish will really focus on one fish or one bait fish. They still do that to some degree, but it's not, it's not like that pattern you hear in the go to the backs of the creeks in the fall and chasing the shad and stuff down in the southern reservoirs. That really doesn't happen too much. There are a few exceptions, which I'll talk about on some lakes. We'll get into that, but perch is one that I think you should really target, because when those fish do school, they get out in open water and they hang out at the surface, and the topwater bite can be exceptional. That's one of the main fish the terns are targeting on Oneida Lake. It's not as good as it used to be, but for years, all you needed to do on a fairly calm day is cruise your boat up and down the north-south shores of Oneida Lake, looking for seagulls and terns, busting on bait. When you did, it was typically on schools of perch. Most people think the terns are really, what's happening is the bass are schooling underneath, driving the bait to the surface where they're visible for the terns and seagulls to eat. So the bass are pretty much the drivers. But one of the things I will say is, once you learn the areas that the fish use, they use them over and over again. And they basically will go out and school fish out in the open bays, drive them against a depth change or a weed bed, and you just have to time it right. So once you learn those areas, you hang out until they show, or you just visit them frequently. So something just in perch. Sodus, just if anyone wants to know, Sodus right now is kind of in a boom of perch. If you talk to ice fishermen, they're having a great time right now. There's huge year classes of roughly 9 to 12-inch perch out there, so it's a good time. So as something to consider as the season goes on, some of those deep water weed bites might be really good this year on Sodus Bay, more so, and you're probably going to get a more reliable bed out in that off weed edge stuff, that 17 to 20 foot of water, as long as that perch population stays the way it is. You do have migration out into Lake Ontario, something to keep in mind on the embayments as opposed to the lake. So some of those will go out in the lake for much of the year. Alewives one I think is curious, and I want to touch upon because there have been some drastic changes. Some of you guys that fish a lot in the fall probably know. But the alewife, first of all, it's a herring. It's an invasive species here. But it's one of our few really major schooling bait fish. It's actually a fish that's much more tolerant. It's meant to live really in the salt water for the majority of its life, come into freshwater to spawn and then go back. Because of that, it doesn't have the right enzymes and things in there to excrete excess salt from its body. As a result, it's really sensitive to temperature changes in DO, things like that can cause real stress. That's why you have big fish kills periodically with alewives. And the reason that's important, I mention that, is because Keuka Lake, many of you guys know in the fall, years ago, over the last 10 years, you go down there with the Alabama rig and get in the right areas, and you can just crank that thing all day and really hammer them to smallmouth or out feeding on alewives. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, there was a major alewife crash on Keuka Lake. For any of you guys that fished the Classic and threw Alabama rigs a lot, you probably realize the bite's not nearly as good as it used to be. So there's going to be a transition period. But as a result, Keuka Lake, the smallmouth are staying shallower for much of the year now. Until that alewife population comes back, you're probably going to see that the case. Canisius Lake is a mystery right now. Alewives were very strong. If you don't know the history there, that's the reason walleye are stocked there. One of the other things alewives do is they eat zooplankton. Zooplankton are large organisms that can eat algae. Because alewives eat all the predators of algae, one of the reasons we have increased algae blooms. So what the DEC does is they stock walleye to eat the alewives, to then get rid of the predator of algae to try to increase water quality. So, but for some reason, right now the surveys are showing that there's not a lot of alewives in Canisius Lake. It's too early to definitively say, but the reason I say that is because alewives, when they do school on Canisius Lake, the topwater bite can be exceptional. They also will get up in the weed beds, and you'll, if you think you're on a real great bite, you go into a weed bed, boom, 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 one fish after another. You go there on a tournament day, and they're totally gone. They're probably in there after a school of alewives, and the alewives left.
The alewives, like in the St. Lawrence Lake, Ontario, do they travel out to the ocean and back?
No. Well, the St. Lawrence, far enough down, yes, but no, not typically.
Not like a life cycle.
No. But one thing to keep in mind, an alewife on Canisius or Keuka is not the same as an alewife on Sodus.
Right.
They're going to go out in Lake Ontario for the majority of the year on Sodus Bay. Canisius, obviously, they're not going anywhere. One thing to keep in mind on Sodus is, and I'll get back, gizzard shad's kind of similar, but it's usually around bass season, the next month after, you'll see a lot of activity in Sodus Bay with shad and alewives. I covered this last time, but it's covered in my presentation. Alewives spawn. What happens is 1 to 2 males get together with the female. They go up to the surface, and they flick around, and then they spiral. They'll spiral up and down. That's how they lay eggs. So what you want to look for, the telltale sign on Sodus Bay, you'll see flashes like that. If you see that, you're there when the spawn's taking place. And when you are, if you're not throwing a topwater bait, a jerk bait, a fluke, donkey rig, if you don't know that, it's a double fluke rig. If you're not throwing something like that, then you're missing out on something probably. Gobies. Touch upon gobies. Gobies are a big thing. As you know, any of the embayments, the Lake Ontario stuff, that's one of the few baits that when present in large numbers, when smallmouth bass, I can't remember the statistics, but over 90% of their diet will be gobies. So something to keep in mind, as most of you know, gobies hug the bottom. They don't like to be up in the water column. They eat mussels, some bugs, but in Lake Ontario, it's almost all zebra mussels, quagga mussels they're eating. So it can be a good thing. They are controlling another invasive. They do harm some of the native skullfins and other bottom-living fish. They do target eggs in the nest. One of the things that is unique, it's covered here, is the goby sensory organs only work when it's at rest, so you can't sense predators while they're moving. So that's why gobies lay on the bottom. They don't move around, and they'll rather sit still. And when they do move, they dart, and then they stop. Then they dart, and then they stop. So just keep that in mind, presentation-wise. When you're fishing, what do you want to do? Drag it too. Drag it a foot, let it stop. Drag it, let it stop. You're mimicking a goby. Other thing, if any of you guys fish Eastern Lake Ontario, the moving bait bite has pretty much slowed considerably the last few years. Even the drop shot bite isn't as good as it always has been. But one of the bites that has really picked up is the Ned rig bite. Dragging around the bottom, small organisms. So things to keep in mind. They do spawn and live in areas very similar to the smallmouth bass on Lake Ontario. They like those transitions between the shale outcroppings and the sand. They kind of hang on those edges, right where the smallmouth like to spawn and hang as well. So, makes sense. There's more and more of those. Oneida, obviously, they haven't boomed nearly as much as some of the other lakes, probably because of the other competition and diversity. But they are getting up there. You're starting to see more and more gobies in the smallmouth. that will probably change. Smallmouth, as I said, or Oneida is one of the few that has such a great diversity between the shad, the perch, the crayfish, now the gobies, that you can pretty much pick a pattern and find somewhere to fish on that lake. I have sculpins on here. The reason I have that on here is they're very similar in terms of habitat. And even if people catch it, you don't usually catch a sculpin, but if you saw one, a lot of people would confuse it with a goby. But when there's not a lot of gobies present, sculpins can be a major food source in the fall, winter for smallmouth bass. And they basically hug the bottom like a goby and a perch, or sitting right on the bottom. But Seneca Lake, in particular, they're a real big food source. Also Canandaigua and Keuka. Other thing I forgot to mention is we've heard a lot of bad news, and this isn't great news either. But right now, Seneca Lake, there's a huge boom on alewives. So while it's an invasive species, not the best, from a bass standpoint, did that improve the fishery? We'll have to see. Gizzard shad, I'm not going to talk too much about. They don't really become a dominant thing. They do spawn near the surface. They will spawn up in streams when available. There are quite a few on Sodus. Oneida is the other one. Oneida, you will see schools of very large gizzard shad. You'll think they're smallmouth under the surface, but look for the deeply forked tail. So when you think you're chasing a bunch of big smallmouth, they may not be. So look for that tail.